is the word of the Lord. John 13, 1 through 17. It was just before the Passover festival. Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. The evening meal was in progress, and the devil had already prompted Judas, the son of Simon Iscariot, to betray Jesus. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet, drying them with the towel that was wrapped around him. He came to Simon Peter, who said to him, "Lord, are you going to wash my feet?" Jesus replied, "You do not realize now what I am doing, but later you will understand." "No," said Peter, "you shall never wash my feet." And Jesus answered, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." "Then, Lord," Simon Peter replied, "not just my feet, but my hands and my head as well." Jesus answered, "Those who never had a bath need only to wash their feet. Their whole body is clean, and you are clean, though not every one of you." For he knew who was going to betray him, and that was why he said, "Not everyone was clean." When he had finished washing their feet, he put on his clothes and returned to his place. "Do you understand what I have done for you?" he asked them. "You call me teacher and Lord, and rightly so, for that is what I am. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also should wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them." This is the word of the Lord.
Hi, Rise Church. How's everybody doing? Good, good. I'm aware that some people are watching online, so I want to wave to you. Thanks for joining us. By the way, a couple of you didn't wave. Let's try it again. Anyhow, my name is Jim. I'm a nobody who's trying to tell everybody about somebody. And today I'm going to talk to you about Jesus. That's my favorite thing to talk about, okay? We're in the kind of beginning the series called Invisible Barriers, and today, very pointedly, I want to describe to you that we're going to be looking at the invisible barrier, the things that hold us back from wholehearted devotion and service to Jesus. And so I want to talk specifically about some of those things, okay? Before I get started, though, I want to thank you. Got a number here. 324 pieces of clothing Arise Church has gathered and is now in my office at the jail. And many of those clothing items, even right now, are going out to inmates who are in need. So I want to say thank you. Thank you for that. So to begin, a question, and then I'm going to tell you a story. Okay, question and a story. What three things make an act of service good? Don't answer that right now, but just think about it. What three things make an act of service good? Something that you do for somebody, something that you do for God. What three things make a thing good? Okay? And I would ask you to continue to reflect upon those questions as we go through this teaching time, okay? So now here's a story. Not too long ago, a couple of friends of mine were in need of help. And they were living in a mobile home, and they were both handicapped, especially the wife. And they had some serious troubles in their bathroom. And right around the toilet area, the floor was like super spongy. And when you walk into their bathroom, and it was a handicapped toilet with one of those handicapped walker things that you kind of walk back and sit down on. And so as I walked into the bathroom and I looked at the toilet, it was clear to me that the floor underneath the toilet had rotted out because of the moisture and the debris that had been leaking from the toilet down into the floor. And so I had the distinct pleasure of pulling the toilet off. Of course, the first thing I needed to do is clean and sanitize the toilet and the floor. And I pulled the toilet off, and then, if you know anything about construction, I know Pastor Sam doesn't at all. I mean, he should probably take a course in, just kidding. But the subfloor was all rotted out brown wastewater. And it took me hours and hours to pull all of that up and rebuild the joist and lay down a new subfloor and something that would support the toilet. And, it was a gnarly job, a super gnarly job. And when I got done, I couldn't get the soil out of my hands for quite some time. And I just reflected on that whole experience, and I thought, wow, nobody saw me do it. It wasn't like it was something in public where I could do it and I could get the adulation of my fellow man or woman. It wasn't like I could highlight the thing. It wasn't a light set on a hill for everybody to see. And you know what? As good as that piece of service was to people who were in genuine need, I got to be real with you and say that I had a problem with it because it was done in secret. And the truth is, when I do good things, I like to be a Superman. I do. I like people to see what I'm doing. I like to kind of fly. Look at what I'm doing. Look at what I'm doing. All these great things that I'm doing. Look at what I'm doing. Did you see that? Did you see that? Oh, here we go. Get his arms up a little bit. Flying around. Jim the Superman. Jim the Superman. I like to be on you guessed it, a pedestal when I serve. But the question is that really a good motive? Is that what makes a thing good? Okay? So I want to talk about that this morning because I think that for many of us, we struggle with service. I struggle with service. I wonder what God says about it. That's what I'd like to talk about this morning. The key idea, if you hear nothing else this morning, the key idea is this. Awe of God's grace in Jesus produces inside of us, in the interior part of ourselves, a heart of eager, grateful, and humble service. To the measure that you are in touch with the awe of God's grace in Jesus will be to the measure that you will respond with a sincere, grateful heart, going out into the world to offer yourself as a living sacrifice to those around you. To the measure. Okay? So I want to get into this a little bit here. Move my guy up a little bit. I want to look at this passage, and, there's so much in this passage, and it's a struggle for somebody like me to kind of teach to it because, like a kid when you're outside playing and you want to turn over stones and find little bugs and worms and everything else, we're going to leave so many of those stones unturned because I want to focus just on a few things, and those few things are these three things. I want to look at the context in which this foot washing story finds itself, and that's the Passover, and more than that, the Passover replaced. And then I want to talk a little bit about the debacle. Ever hear that funny word? Debacle. Debacle. A complete failure, in other words. I want to look at how the disciples of Jesus absolutely had an epic fail in this whole scene. And then the third thing I want to talk about is the scandal. The scandal of Jesus and how it was reversed. Okay, so those three things: Passover, debacle, scandal. Simple enough. The Passover is going to go real quick, but I just want to orient you to the truth that this Last Supper, this experience that Jesus is having with his disciples, happens during the Passover ceremony. You gotta understand the context of it, because it's so important. Now, just very briefly said, the Passover was drawn from the Old Testament part of God's people's history, when God commanded them, take a lamb unblemished and slaughter it, and take the blood and paint it above the door and on the sides of your door, because there's coming the angel of death, and when that angel of death passes through, he's going to see the blood of the unblemished lamb on top and on the sides, and your house and all in it will be passed over. Passed over. And God initiated this institution, shall we say, as a lasting memorial, okay? Something that they were supposed to do from this time on. And it was one of the most powerful ceremonies in all of Judaism, the Passover. Now, when Jesus is teaching during this time, it's very interesting. Just before the Passover festival, Jesus knew that the hour had come for him to leave this world and go to the Father. Having loved his own who were in the world, he loved them to the end. To the end. To the end. So it's as if Jesus is fulfilling the Passover, and he's giving a new symbol to replace the old, and that new symbol is communion, the Lord's Supper. Okay? So much more could be said about that, but that's the trouble that I'm having. I'm going to focus on just a few other things. I want to move into the debacle. So coming up into any festival, you got to understand that the disciples were likely jockeying for position. You ever go to like a play or a game or some event, and you want to get there early so you can get the best seat? Okay, Jesus talks a little bit about this, because this is a bit of the backstory that you have to understand that's going on here. The disciples, they've gotten into these arguments about who's going to be the greatest, right? Who's going to be the Superman among the disciple band? Who's going to be the top dog, right? And on so many occasions, Jesus found them arguing about it, and he rebuked them, and he taught them, and he basically said, listen, the way up is down. The way to greatness is to be a servant. It's the upside down kingdom of God, right? And in one place, Jesus, in Luke chapter 14, verse 7, he's saying, when he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them the parable. And basically the parable is, when you go into a place and you're going to be seated, sit at the lowest place, because who knows, you might be elevated to a higher place. However, if you sit in the highest place of honor, you will likely be demoted. You see how that works? The way up is down, the upside down kingdom of God. And so what we have going on here is right away, the disciples are showing themselves for who they are. It's a debacle exposed. The early bird gets the worm. And as I was doing a little bit of study on this, I came to see that, I guess I'd never seen this in the passage before, but rabbis and Jewish scholars early back, just after this period, they told a little bit about the seating arrangement during a Passover meal, and it's kind of like shaped like a U, okay? Imagine that, shaped like a U, a low table, not like wooden tables that people are sitting at, like so many of the depictions of the Passover and the Lord's Supper and everything. But they would sit there and they recline on their left elbow, and at the bottom of the U would be the highest place of honor. And Jesus is at the highest place of honor, of course. And yet at the left was the next person who was at the highest place of honor, and to Jesus' right would be the second. Okay? And so Jesus is reclining on his left elbow. As we look at the passage, you got to understand that John was likely the second place of honor here, and behind him, where he could talk and listen, was likely Judas. Okay? So all of the disciples are scrambling for the best seat for the Passover dinner. And it wasn't just that, it was whoever gets the best seat is a show of who is greatest in the kingdom. Who's going to be greatest in the kingdom? How did I tell you a story about this? Years ago, after I became a Christian, I found myself in a church. And I think it's funny how churches, they come into a city, a denomination, or a tradition, and it's like first church of this, and the second church of this, and third church. Whoever gets there first. We're first, you're second, you over there, you're third. And I happened to wander into a church that was called Seventh. It was Seventh. It was Seventh, and I'm a new believer. And I walk in, and it's the old style. And I love them. They're beautiful. Stained glass window, A-frame construction, these huge beams, hard wooden pews. That thing could probably fit 500 people. A beautiful balcony, an organ. And I'm a new believer, and I'm walking in. And, everybody's sitting like way back, like half the way back. And so the entire front forward was all empty. And I think, listen, in the classroom, I like to sit in the front row. It's the power row. So I'm going to go up close to the front. And I'm like walking up there, and it's about fifth row from the front. And I slip in, you know how you shuffle down the pew, and I sit down. I'm the only one around. I would guess that there are a couple hundred people behind me, and so I'm the one person up front. And next thing you know, I was trying to get into a frame of worship and honoring God, and there I am. And then all of a sudden, I feel somebody tapping my shoulder. And I look up, and I kind of expected somebody to say, "I see that you're new here. Thank you for coming." Excuse me. You're in the elders' row. You're going to have to move. Listen, it truthfully happened. I unknowingly sat in the place of honor, and I was very promptly demoted. All right? Demoted. Anyway, just a funny story. It gives you a little context to what we have going on here. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is in terms of the disciples. Now, keep in mind, what three things make an act of service good? Okay, keep that in mind. The next thing is this, the servants of none. The servants of none. Pastor Joel brilliantly sketched out for us some of the cultural practices when people gather together in somebody's house for a meal. And particularly so when we come into a Jewish festival, these traditions were very pronounced. And so somebody would have been there normally, a servant, a very lowly servant, to wash their feet. Now, coming into a Passover festival like this, they would have already washed in a ceremonial way in a mikvah, going down into the water, washed. It was part of the ritual cleansing. And they would come up and they would dress, and then they would go off to the meal. But on the way, with their sandals, their feet would get dirty, and so they would come into the house, take their sandals off, and usually the lowest rung of the slave or servant would be the one washing the feet. And here's the thing, nobody was there to wash their feet. And so they all sat there, and it's curious that none of the disciples would pull that toilet off. None of them would do it. Because to do it would to say, I am the lowest. I take the lowest seat of honor among the disciple band. I don't want to be this. I want to be this. Invisible. Nobody would do it. How long had they been with Jesus? Do you know that the teaching on humility in the teachings of Jesus is one of the most pronounced teachings in all of the New Testament? The teaching of humility. So, listen. The disciples fail on a couple of levels. Now, I want to talk about Peter. And just bear with me because I'm going to get to an area where we're going to dissect a couple of, this is one of my favorite things to do, dissect a couple of Greek words, and then I'm going to take those Greek words and I'm going to poke them right in you, okay? And you're going to scream like a little baby. At least I did when I discovered these. Okay, I want to talk just briefly about Peter. So Peter is the impulsive leader of the disciple band, right? And Jesus is going around. You got to study the Passover flow of the meal, and you'll get a better hang of this. I'm not going to go into those details right now, but during the meal, Jesus, knowing that he's going back to the Father, he rises up, he takes off his outer clothing, he grabs a towel, and he gets a basin of water, pours it, and it was already there waiting. Nobody would do it. So Jesus demonstrates what service and humility is, but that's not the core of the passage. I'll get to that in a minute. Okay, and he stoops down and he starts to wash the disciples' feet. Now, it's not clear if all or any of the disciples liked it, but certainly Peter didn't. And it's characteristic of Peter having, he's like a fragmented stone. He's not firm yet. He's got legs of clay on the one hand and legs of iron on the other. He's unfinished. So he gets some things right, but other things he doesn't. And so the first thing that he does is he says, Jesus, no way, you're never going to do that. Not me. And so on the one hand, it seems like he's trying to be humble, but on the other hand, he's incredibly arrogant that he doesn't want to receive this gift from Jesus. And then Jesus teaches him, and he says, listen, unless I wash you, you've got no part of me. And then Peter says, well, don't wash just my feet, then my hands and my head as well. Wash my whole self, right? And so he's humble, but he's also dictating, and he has the audacity to command Jesus what to do. Do you do that? Do you do that at all? Command Jesus what to do? Dictate to him how it should go? Okay. Much more could be said about Peter. One thing I will say, remember, just a little bit later, Jesus is saying, hey, you know what? I'm going away and you can't come with me. And Peter says in the latter part of chapter 13, he says, Lord, I'm willing to lay down my life for you. Ouch. Did he do that? We'll talk about that in a minute, a little bit more. But I want to talk about Judas. Okay, I don't know how you feel about Judas. Remember the three things that make an active service good. Judas is an Academy Award Oscar winning for Best Actor. You know what surprises me? That when the narrative unfolds and the text in verse 22 says, his disciples, after Jesus said, truly I tell you, one of you is going to betray me. He finishes washing and he lays back down, and they're eating freely again, and he's troubled, and he says, one of you is going to betray me. Think about that. One of you is going to betray me. And the disciples are at a loss as to who it would be. In your friend circles, don't you have kind of a read on people? You know people's idiosyncrasies, their weaknesses, their tendencies. You know that this person over here tends to embellish the truth. This person here tends to love the acceptance of people and just agrees with everything that people say, and that when they go their way and they're not around the person, they tend to backbite a little bit. I mean, we know how people are, especially our close friends, and yet the passage says that they were astonished. They were astonished. They didn't even know what Jesus was talking about. And here's the thing, if they had known who it was and what this person was going to do, I think it's safe to say that that person would not have left the room alive. We're talking about treachery, betrayal of the worst kind. Now, I can't, years ago, I used to be sympathetic to Judas. I thought, you know what? Judas was trying to usher in the kingdom of God. He was trying to turn Jesus over, that Jesus would, be forced into a position where he had to exert his power and bring in the kingdom of God and make it happen faster. That's what I thought, and I reasoned with myself that maybe Judas had good intentions. I no longer think that. As a matter of fact, what does Jesus say about him? It would be better if somebody like this had not been what? Been born. I don't know how it is. It's a beautiful display of Jesus, that he's loving his disciples to the end. He knows what's coming. It's right around the corner. He's about to be betrayed into the hands of wicked men. All right? And he's loving them. He's caring for them right up to the bitter end. And not only that, he's placing Judas, scholars, there's a wide agreement among scholars that Judas was likely the person in the first position of honor. So his seating by Jesus was love's final appeal. Like Jesus is wooing him in. Judas, the kingdom of God is at hand. The grace of God is available to you. Come. And then not only that, but to take bread and to dip it, and then somebody so close as Judas must have been to give it, was another appeal of love. It's an act of devotion and honor. And right up to the very end, Jesus is trying to woo Judas in. Do you see that? Woo him in. And yet his heart is closed. It's dark. It's dead. And Jesus literally says, what you do, make it happen faster. He finally just let him go. I don't know how this all works. Somebody who could be walking so closely with Jesus, who could be in the best small group on the planet, have God himself teaching, and have a great, deep, authentic fellowship, to go out with a disciple band and watch Jesus do miracles, and go out 2 by 2 in groups of even more than that, and they're doing all of these miraculous wonders. And Judas, he's a part of it, but nobody could tell. Nobody knew it. Here's the danger, people. The person sitting right next to you could be a Judas. I don't know. On a regular basis, I ask myself, am I a Judas? People look at the outward appearance, but guess what? God looks upon the heart. How could somebody be so close to God himself in the flesh and remain absolutely unresponsive to that grace? I don't know. But I'll tell you this, it terrifies me. It really, really terrifies me. So here's the thing. There is a warning. There is a warning. We've got in play here issues about ingratitude, pride, arrogance, slothfulness, narcissism. These are all barriers that keep us from experiencing the grace of God in our lives and actually going out and serving God with a full, sincere heart. All right? Okay, I want to get to the key, and I'm going to press you. I'm going to give you a little warning because it's going to get a little tricky in here. Okay? And you're not going to like me after some of the things that I'm about to say. Here we go. who is the greatest? Jesus, on a number of occasions, he walks in and he finds his disciples arguing about who is the greatest. And I want to just read a little section, if I can find it. I'm on the page, but I'm not seeing it. Anyhow, I've got the great words here. So Jesus says, listen, the authorities, they lord it over you. They use their authority to exploit. But he says, not you. And this is a response to, hey, I'm going to be the greatest. I'm going to be the first person. You can be the second. You can be the fourth. I don't care, but I want to be on top. And two of the disciples even come to Jesus and they say, hey, what about this? We want to be at the right and the left hand of your kingdom. And Jesus says, it's not for you to decide that. It's not for you to decide that. The way up is down. The way of greatness is what? Service. To be first is to be last. To be last is to be first. It's the upside-down kingdom of God. And here's the interesting thing. Kata kuriosien. Jesus says, you're not to do this. It simply means to exercise lordship. Now, listen, you got to hear this. To exercise lordship over. In other words, people exist to benefit me. You see that? People exist to benefit me. Another thing Jesus says that the Gentiles do and that you're not to do is kata kurosien, exercise authority over. People exist to carry out my will. Think of the disciples, think of Peter, think of Judas. Here's the sad tragedy of Judas. He had no use for Jesus anymore. He had no use for Jesus anymore. He figured that Jesus was going down anyway. The kingdom wasn't coming. There was religious opposition. It was just a matter of time before Jesus was taken out and killed. Why doesn't he just hasten the whole thing along and maybe he'll pat his pocket also? Right? And in other words, Jesus is saying, don't be like them. Rather be like the diakonos. Service. Very simple word. I exist to benefit God and others. Doulos, slave, to be a slave to the Son. I exist to carry out God's will. Well, what would it be like if we lived this way all the time? In response to the grace of God in our lives, what if we were to do this? Do you find in your own soul that you have a tendency to treat people like a mine or a quarry from which you draw out of what you think will fill your emptiness and satisfy your needs? Don't we all do that to some measure? People exist to carry out what I want. Don't we find that in the business world? I mean, we don't find that in politics at all. I'm so glad that this election cycle, we've seen none of that. It's amazing to me. It is utterly amazing to me that we've seen none of that. But what would it be like for us from this moment on to take a stand that I exist to benefit God and others? When I was in seminary, I had a professor during a chapel. He said, listen, the acquisition of knowledge, like church history, apologetics, Greek and Hebrew, biblical studies, pastoral studies, all of these things. He said, all of these things, you're gaining knowledge and experience in this, not to set yourself up here like a Superman. I'm embellishing Superman, but that's what he said, right? Knowledge is to serve others. Our whole selves. Just think of it this way. What gifts do you have that nobody else has? You are a unique expression of God on the earth. Nobody has ever been like you are. Nobody ever will be again like you are. You are a unique image bearer of God with unique gifts and skills and abilities, and you're placed in a context, in a sphere of influence that nobody else is. How will you use your life to benefit God and others? What barriers are holding you back? I got to tell you a story. What time is it? Okay. I'll finish up shortly after this, but I really feel I need to tell you a story. Would you receive a personal story? Okay. Yeah, you shake your heads really quickly. Would you promise not to use what I'm about to share with you to look down on me? Huh? I see two people. No, one person. No. Okay. Listen. I gotta share this. I'm willing to throw myself under the bus. Okay. After like serving 6 churches for over 20 years, I got so burned out that I took a year off. Well, God gave me a year off, and I worked retail. Lost my arm, recovering from surgery, and I'm at this retail place, and like I am hemorrhaging arrogance. I have God pressing against every bit of my pride, my entitlement, my sense of self, my sense of self-importance. And I'm like, literally, I can barely, because of my surgery on my shoulder, I can barely lift my arm. And I'm in a retail store, and I'm putting hooks in peg holes. And I couldn't even do that. I had to lift up my arm to do it. I can't believe they gave me a job. All right. Are they nuts or what? They got to be nuts. But, God taught me so many lessons. And after a while, I thought, okay, God, I think I've learned some lessons. I'm ready to move on. And you know what? God wasn't moving me on. And it drawn out for months and months and months. Remember the toilet. Remember the foot washing. Remember table etiquette. I want that high place of position and honor. I'm just being real with you. God kept me there, and he wasn't letting me go. And I started to get really upset with God. Anybody here have a cat? Any cat lovers? Cat lovers? Yeah? I love cats. Kittens are another story. Don't get too close to a kitten. Get your eyes clawed out. I love cats, but imagine me as a cat in a corner, upset and angry. You know how they do that, and they like snap their hand at you to try to flick you in the face kind of thing. I'm doing that to God because I'm so mad. And I'm like, God, why do you have me here? Is this all you have for me? Am I out to seed? Are you done with me? Is this all that I have left? Right? Remember, I'm like floating around like that. Come on. I'm somebody. Am I not somebody? I don't know. I think I want to be somebody. I want to be here. And you know what? God put me down here behind the pedestal, invisible. And at one point, I remember, I don't know what if I was like pushing a cart, of all this cheap crap. And I'm like pushing a cart, and I'm like, I can't believe that I'm still here. God, why? And I got so upset, and I looked up to the ceiling. It's like 20 feet in the air, and I said, Lord, and this is where I'm embarrassed. I'm just going to tell you. I said, Lord, I know Greek and Hebrew. And here I am putting hooks on these stupid pegs. And I said, God, I've got degrees stacked up like cordwood. I've got a master's degree, professional man. What are you doing here? And you know what God did? I'm telling you. You know what God did? In the kindest and the gentlest way, he said, Jim, I've got you earning a real master's degree. And you are going to learn obedience and humility. And you ain't getting out of here until you do. You know what? It's true. It's true. Listen, if I could say that's the gospel truth, that is the gospel truth. And God kept me there so long past the point, and I knew that I was ready to launch off when it didn't matter to me if I stayed or if I went. I just said, Lord, my wife, my dear wife, she said, Jim, in our over 20 years of marriage, I have never seen you so surrendered and submitted to God ever. You know what? If you want to wipe away these invisible barriers to service, if you want to be humble, God will put you through it. It's not just going to happen like downloading an app. God will put you for a very long season of time into a very humiliating place so that you can learn dependence. I'm here to tell you. And when that happens, you better be grateful. You better be grateful. Listen, I want to wrap up with a couple of things. The three things, there may be more. This is what I would say they are. Three things that a thing needs in order to be good. The first is that it needs to be done out of faith in God. Without faith, it's impossible to please God. The next one, the second thing is it needs to be according to God's law, God's will. It needs to be. And the third thing, there may be more. The third thing is for God's glory. So out of faith, according to God's law, and for God's glory. And here's the thing, it's never our own. It's never for our own glory. You got to burn that out of you. Never for our glory. What if we all lived this way? What if we all lived this way? You know, the 11 disciples eventually did. You know, they changed the world. They changed the world. And we can join them in their legacy of humble service and sacrifice. We can. And as a matter of fact, we're invited to do so. We can go out and live like Jesus in selfless service. Listen, I'm cutting it a little short. Time is advanced. What if we live this way? What if all of us live this way, as if our lives, we were here, we existed to benefit God and others? We could be world changers. You realize that? World changers. So listen, thanks for your attention. Thanks for Pastor Joel, Pastor Sam, allowing me the privilege to teach today. And I do hope that you have a wonderful week. And I would ask you to rise. I'd love to bless you with the old priestly blessing from Numbers chapter 6. People of God, the Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord turn his face toward you and grant you his wonderful peace. Have a great week, everybody.